GMAT Ninja here. Welcome to MBA Spotlight, November 2024 edition. Today, we're going to talk about how to launch your GMAT prep. So if you are just getting started with the GMAT, what can you do in 4 months? What are your best first steps? How to know when to bail on the GMAT and switch to something else. Here on the panel, three people who, for most of you, probably don't need an introduction, three of the giants of the GMAT world. Stacy Koprince, Director of Curriculum and Content, Manhattan Prep. Rajat Sadana, co-founder of eGMAT. Jeff Miller, Chief Operations Officer, Target Test Prep. Let's jump right in, you guys. So we framed this video as how to launch your GMAT studies in 4 months. I want to start with this. If you're talking to somebody who's totally new to the GMAT and they're wondering, how much can I achieve in 4 months? What's realistic? How would you answer that? What sort of size of improvement is reasonable? And Jeff, since your mic's up, I'll pick on you first.
All right. Well, that's a good question. One of the first things that I always tell people to start with is a practice test, right? So it's not a blanket statement of, hey, you can improve by 300 points just because. It's, well, let's see where you're starting and where you need to get to, right? If by your default is, I have the basics down, I understand how substitution and algebra works and the basis of an argument and critical reasoning, then you could make some pretty major gains, 100, even 200 points in that 4 months. And then, of course, it's also not a blanket statement because everybody has different life schedules and different amounts of time that they can study. So if someone's saying, I can do 10 hours a week for 4 months, and you compare that to the person who can do 25 hours a week for 4 months, it's going to be much different. The result will look different. So unfortunately, there's a lot of gray in the answer, but the one thing I would say is that 4 months is, if you're working hard and you put a pretty solid study schedule together, I think that 4 months is a amount of time to achieve some pretty great things with GMAT. So I don't think a lot of people would be stymied from saying, if their situation was, hey, I only can study for 4 months.
And Jeff, I love that answer. I'm going to say something mean, not about you, Jeff, but statistically, so GMAT has compiled data. I mean, this is fairly old data. The stuff they released publicly that said that the average person who retakes the GMAT improves by only 30 points on average, and most of those gains are people who are starting at a low level. So what I think all four of us agree on here is that, hey, in 4 months, if you have a good study plan and you're working hard, you can achieve a much larger gain. Part of what's always interesting about these things is that statistically, people who just retake and do not have a great plan and a ton of work necessarily, the average person just retaking 30 points is the average gain, and that's it.
So I think just along the line with Jeff said, it's just when you say 4 months, it's one way to look at time. Another way to look at time is how many hours does that amount to? What's the level of consistency that's there? When do you take breaks? So if you look at the ideal case, when someone's putting in about between 18 and 20 hours a week, you're looking at about 100 hours a month, give or take, considering a couple of vacation days. So then 4 months is about 300, 350 hours because you're not going to be studying all the time. So there, on an average, about between 170 to 220 points is what we've seen. Assuming you are reasonably consistent, I'm assuming talking about 80% consistency, and the fact that you're executing efficiently. That's kind of what I've seen now. If the number of hours goes down, you go to 10 hours a week, the consistency breaks, and then I've seen people fail to achieve 70-point improvements in 4 months as well. So it's a lot about the quality that you put in. I usually ask individuals to really just say, hey, the first 2 weeks is where you're figuring out how many hours can you rely on. And honestly, you can't really say, I'm going to put in 25 hours and assume you're going to get into those 25 hours. That doesn't happen. It is that period where, in fact, I just tell individuals, first 4 to 5 days, doesn't matter what you study as long as you put in those 2 hours. Those 2 hours need to be in a constant time slot, and as long as you can commit to this and you can live up to that commitment, that's when you can think about planning. But yeah, it's typically 15 to 17 hours for every 10 point of improvement is what I would say.
So, Rajat, I think what you're suggesting, so when we ask the question, okay, where should you start your prep? I think we all kind of agree that, yeah, take a practice test, see where you stand, because if you're looking for a 400-point improvement, you've got a very different road ahead of you than if you're looking for a 40-point improvement. I mean, that's the obvious one, but I think you're suggesting something else that I don't necessarily hear mentioned all that often, which is it's figuring out in those first 4 or 5 days or that first week, how much can you study? It's almost
Yeah.
thinking about your schedule and bandwidth as one of your very first steps. Um, and Stacey, I see your mic popping up.
I was going to add one other thing to do at the very beginning, which is not about your studies, but it's about figuring out where you want to go. So make sure that you're going and looking at your target schools' websites and seeing what they're posting for their average scores so that you know where you're trying to get to. And this year, or for probably about the next year, that's going to be more annoying than it usually is because most schools are still publishing their average scores on the old scale. They basically publish for the last cycle, the last admission cycle that they went through. And for that admission cycle, the primary test was the old version of the GMAT. So you're going to have to do like an extra step this time where you look up what their average score is on the old scale. And then you go to MBA.com where they have posted, how to convert to the new scale to figure out what the score that you're going to go for is on the new scale. But yeah, that's an important part of the beginning of your process too.
Couple quick things for anybody watching us live. If you have questions that you'd like us to address, please put it in the Q&A. There's a little Q&A feature that you're going to see here on AirMeet. Put them in there. Anything that is on topic, especially if it's getting upvoted, we'll toss it into the mix. We also have a poll that some of you have answered. We'll let it roll for a little bit longer. So we want to know when you're planning to apply to business school. So far, it looks like most of you are actually thinking round 2, which is interesting because you don't have a ton of time left for round 2. I guess one thing I'd add, so I think kind of the 3 things that seem to be coming up as far as best places to start, as far as launching your GMAT studies, obviously taking a practice test, see where you stand, get a sense of your goals based on where your target programs, what the averages might be at your target programs. I love Rajat's suggestion that figure out how much you can study and how good you are at the act of sitting down and studying with consistency. I think that's brilliant. One thing I might throw into the mix, sometimes we see candidates who are starting their GMAT process and they say, I want score X. I want a 680 because that's the average at the school I'm interested in. Okay. Well, when does that apply to you and when does it not apply to you? If your profile is absolutely spectacular for that school, whatever that program might be, then you probably don't need that 680. You might not need to come anywhere terribly close to it. And if you have a profile where that school is going to reject you anyway, it's a totally different conversation. So if you are not clear about where you stand in terms of just your overall profile relative to your competitors at the schools you're interested in, go talk to a good admissions consultant, chat with people at the schools themselves and get a sense of what's realistic for in terms of that ultimate goal. Next question I'd like to throw at you guys, I guess, is there anything else that's kind of under the radar in terms of early starting points for somebody's studies? So if somebody's just launching, is there anything else that you wish more of your students would do? Raja, go for it.
Yeah, so I would honestly wish that before taking that first mock, we're gonna, we talked about this career starting point, spend some time practicing questions. I mean, I usually say about, you've got 10 subsections on the GMAT, spend 30 minutes on each subsection. It's about 300 to 350 minutes of practice, pure practice, so that you're familiar with the question types. So that first mock score is a slightly more representative. You get a more realistic starting point, honestly. That's one thing that I wish more people did. And that way, you get a more realistic starting point, because otherwise what really happens is people take the first mock and some of them really say, oh, this is too low. Others say, oh, I didn't know this question type, so maybe this is not representative, but they don't take a second mock then. And so I think that's one thing that I would say.
Jeff, Stacey, any other thoughts on kind of underrated starting points?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of more of a macro thought. I think people need to go into their GMAT prep understanding, what it will take to succeed on the GMAT. I find that a lot of students will come to us with very unrealistic expectations of what they want to happen, whether they've seen, forum posts here on GMAT Club or spoken to coworkers. Like, it's a process. And I don't know why this happens with the GMAT when you compare it to like the CFA, for example, where people fully understand that they're going to study for a year, for example, to get through one of the levels of the CFA. Comes to the GMAT, they're like, well, hey, I need a 705 in 2 months. I can do it, right? I took math in high school. And that's just not, yes, for some people, the outliers, yes, they can do it. But for the vast majority of us, that's not how it operates. So if you can go in with the appropriate mentality of, okay, I'm going to give this 6 months and I might need 8 months, but don't worry, I'm not going to apply for at least 2 years, then you're in the driver's seat. And I tell people all the time that it's better to be first in line with your GMAT score, ready for round one apps, than last in line and a round two deadline when you're just fitting in your GMAT to try to get everything done. So try to make a mentality shift before you start your prep.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Jeff. And that's part of the number I threw out earlier. Average retaker of the GMAT improves by 30 points or so, which isn't the kind of improvement that most people who reach out to any of us for tutoring or for a course. Most people are looking for a lot more than 30 points, and most people statistically, according to GMAT, don't achieve that. Of course, you can with enough work, but it might take a lot of work. I'm going to say I'm the mean guy today. I'm going to toss this poll on stage. So, the folks who are watching us live, when are you planning to apply to business school? And majority are actually applying in round two, which, as we record this, is about, depending on the school, 7 weeks away. And yeah, you can still make some improvements, obviously, in 6 or 7 weeks. But ideally, what you're doing is, if you're thinking about round one, round two applications in the fall here in the Northern Hemisphere, ideally, you're starting your prep maybe now for next year, January, February, because you want to have time just in case it turns out that it's going to be harder on you than you expect. So thank you for everybody who's been answering the poll. I appreciate it. Okay, let's talk about efficiency a little bit, because one of the things, as we talk about, well, for some people, those you end up kind of getting punked by it being harder than you might expect. What are the things people can do to keep their studies efficient from the very start? What are the sorts of things that they can do to kind of build in really good study hygiene so that they can ideally get this done a little bit faster? Even if they do need a huge improvement, it's going to take 4 months or 6 months. What can they do to make that as efficient as possible?
And
Thanks. Go for
I'll
it,
jump
Stacey.
in here. It's all about learn something, practice it, learn something, practice it, learn something, practice it. So you don't want to sit down and read 40 pages of like lessons, or watch 40, whatever, a huge number of videos, and only then go do some practice problems. You also don't want to study for 3 months and only then take your next practice test. So I see a lot of people will like pushing off putting themselves into testing situations or doing timed problem sets or something like that because they're nervous about how it's going to go, or they want to learn more before they get in there, whatever it might be. Think of this as learning how to play any kind of sport or any kind of game. Yeah, you're going to learn some rules, but then you're going to get out there and you're going to try it and you're going to do it, and you're going to not do so well, and you're going to, hit the ball in the net or whatever it might be. But you're going to practice what you're learning, because what you're doing there is giving your brain a chance to actually learn how to try to learn. And you got to make to do when you get to the test.
I think we're losing you a little bit there, Stacey.
Oh.
Yeah.
Jeff, did you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Stacy's point's a good one. I mean, one of the things I probably say this 15 times a day, is topical learning, topical practice. It's so key. I think a lot of people think, hey, I'll just crack open a book, I'll crush questions, and through osmosis, I'll learn everything I need to learn because I'm just doing a lot of random questions. And it doesn't really work like that, especially when you're dealing with every test is almost like a needle in a haystack with what you're going to be asked. So if you can learn each topic and check the box and then practice that topic, it doesn't mean you don't do mixed stuff at a certain point in your prep. But when you're learning, you really got to make sure that you master a topic, check the box, and move on. And it makes sense. Like, nobody learns 12 languages at once. No one learns 12 instruments at once. Like, everything is very structured, and how we learn in the GMAT is certainly no different.
Related question that popped up from the live group. So how important is it to cover all quant aspects? And I guess kind of the implication here is that, well, so of course, if you're going for a super elite score, like if you're going for, you're trying to score in the high 80s on quant, you're going to have to study absolutely everything. But I guess how much wiggle room is there for somebody who, maybe is happy with the 75 or an 80 quant? Do they really need to go that deep into some of the minor stuff, certain number properties things, or probability or whatever? So I guess when somebody walks in the door, and I guess Rajat, I'll pick on you next. I guess when can you cut corners on that? I guess is one way to frame the question.
So it depends on which topics we're talking about. So I think one of the things you've got to understand about the GMAT is that you get. I mean, we all went to the GMAT summit. Most of us actually did, right? And one of the things that you kind of took away from that summit was you make a mistake on an easy or a medium, easy medium kind of question, you get penalized a lot more. So you don't want to leave a topic on which you're likely to get those kind of questions and get them wrong, because that's going to kill the hard work that you've done, mastering the hard topics. Let's say you do really well in word problems, you do really well in inequalities. That could be killed if you really do poorly on an easy number properties question. And this is where we see a lot of those reports on GMAT Club, on Reddit. We've seen with our students as well. I made just 5 mistakes, I got a 78. How the hell does this work? Whereas this other guy has an 86 with, or 85 with 5 mistakes again. So can you leave some topics? Maybe the harder questions, yes, on a few topics if you're not aiming for an 85, 86, 87 or higher score. But I would absolutely cover the easier or easy medium questions on all topics, just because it's a computer adaptive test. There is that aspect of it. It allows you to make mistakes on harder questions, but it also penalizes you on easier questions disproportionately. So you don't want that.
I think maybe taking that a step further, I think you're spot on that. That adaptive test, you want to mitigate your downside risk. You can't miss easy stuff.
Absolutely.
Essentially. So that means that when we think about it in a topic basis, well, okay, probability is 2 or 3% of quant questions. It's tiny. Can you ignore it? You can, again, depending on your goals, maybe you can ignore the harder stuff.
Absolutely.
But you should be able to handle the very, very, very basics
very,
at
very
minimum.
basic. Yes.
And the other implication of all that is if we think about sort of the efficiency of your prep or how best to launch your prep, and I think the 4 of us have spoken enough over the years that I think we'd all pretty much agree on this, maybe in slightly different language, that one of the biggest things you're looking for is really good execution from the start. You want to build good habits so that you're not making careless errors. You don't want to beat yourself. You don't want to make calculation errors and not catch them. So, when we tutor people, a lot of what we focus on is really good, strong process. So you're doing things the same way every time so that you never miss a question that's easy for you. And then you can build the harder stuff on top of that as you move forward in your studies. And I think I've heard all 3 of you say similar things over the years. Again, different language or whatever around it, but I think we all pretty much agree on that. Okay, trying to jump into more of the questions here. I guess another thought while I go digging through the mountain of questions that's landing here. And again, if you're watching us live, keep tossing those into the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. When should you bail on self-study? I think the vast majority of students start with, hey, I'm going to study on my own. Because why spend money on a tutor or a course if you're not sure you need to? Most people wait and say, okay, I'm going to do that once I'm in trouble. And there's exceptions to that. But most people are doing self-study, maybe something that's very self-paced. What are the signs that you should pull the plug on your self-study and go get some help? When can you know that it's time for that? Yeah, Jeff, I see your brain
That's a
working.
good. I mean, I talk to students about that a lot. One of the things, I guess, the first thing to understand is you never really actually ever bail on self-study. I mean, one of the comments I make to students is, look, we're going to meet together maybe 2, 3 hours a week, right? Well, guess what? You're studying maybe 18 to 20 hours a week. So for those other 17 hours, you are in essence self-studying, right? So you need to continue to follow a very good plan. At TTP, our students are following the self-study course while we're doing the tutoring. So it enforces the idea that we always want you taking steps forward, because like any great coach, if you have a weightlifting coach and you weightlift on a Monday and then you don't do anything from Monday to the next Monday, like, are you really going to achieve the goals you want to achieve? So I think having a plan in place for when the tutoring is happening will allow you to continue to make those gains. To your question, though, in general, like, I think it's a feeling. Like, if you just feel like you're spinning your wheels, you're getting stuck in the mud and you're getting frustrated, yeah, you should start to consult a coach. Now, how many hours you potentially need with that coach kind of depends on your situation. obviously your budget and things of that nature. But I wouldn't wait till the last hour to be like, oh crap, like this self-study just isn't working. Like talk to someone early. If anything, it's going to help you because you're talking to a professional, someone who really knows this space and who can advise you, honestly and give you what you need to move forward.
I think.
Stacey?
Sorry, Stacey. Stacey, you want to go first, or?
I mean, I do have things to say. And really what I would think about it, so there's two levels here too, talking about if you're going to work with other people, right? Which is taking a class or doing tutoring. A class is a more cost-effective way, essentially, to get hours, both with a teacher, somebody who knows what they're doing when they're talking about this test, but also fellow classmates and people who are in the journey with you. It can help to keep you motivated. You can set up study groups outside of class with people who are working with the same materials, who are on the same schedule with you, that kind of stuff. So if you find yourself either hitting a wall or having trouble staying motivated, procrastinating. This was totally me when I was getting ready for the test. Having a class or something like that can really just help you to keep on schedule, to keep yourself honest, and keep going with that stuff. Tutoring is obviously much more expensive, but it's also much more targeted because it's just you and the tutor. That's for something like, I mostly feel like I mostly do feel like I can study while on my own in those hours that I'm not meeting with the tutor, like Jeff was saying. But I need direction. I'm hitting a wall. I need somebody to help me break through the barriers that I'm hitting. And that can be anything from, there are certain topics that are just not working for my brain and somebody needs to explain them to me, to I keep making, similar mistakes, but I don't really know why. And I don't know how to not make them in future. And in that case, we're playing the role of, essentially, it's like, I call it diagnosing, right? So I literally, I watch you do problems, you talk aloud while you're doing them, and then I can figure out, based on what I'm seeing you do and what I'm hearing you say, okay, here's where things are going wrong in your brain, or here's where your process is opening you up to careless errors, or whatever it might be. So it literally is like a doctor watching you and diagnosing you to point things out to you that you might not be able to see for yourself. You're too close to it.
And Stacey, I think that's the biggest thing by far. Like for me, like the one answer to it is, if I were going to bottom line it in one overly simple sentence, it's when you don't know why your results are the way they are, that's when you want to go talk to somebody. If you know that you need to practice topic X, you need to practice percentages, ratios, whatever. Well, hey, we all have there's all sorts of ways to do that. You can get a book, you can go on GMAT Club, you can go on Target Test Prep, eGMAT, Manhattan Prep. We all have videos, right? I mean, there's all sorts of ways to learn that if you know that that's a weakness. If you're looking at results and going, why? I don't know why I'm struggling. That's when you need help. Rajat, did you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, just for us, when we look at the kind of people who come in to buy a course, we get people at different stages. So one is the segment of users who say, I need a course. I know I'm not going to study. People know themselves and they really say, okay, I need something that gives me that structure. I think a lot of people who go to TTP do the same thing. They want a structure. They want something that tells them what to do. So that's one reason. And if you are that individual, I mean, most people who are preparing for the GMAT are 24, 25 years of age. They know what works for them and what doesn't work for them. So I think that's one segment. The second piece is where people hit a wall. And you guys covered that segment over here. And that could happen pretty much at any point, where you might be stuck at a 50th percentile in a particular subsection, or there are folks who join our course who are already at a 655, can't improve beyond that point or so, and they have very specific needs. So again, those are the two large categories that we rarely see over there. At the same time, we also see individuals who, uh, by themselves, they're good test takers. They start with a 615 and just do our free trial or TDP's free trial and get to their target scores. And that also happens, and then that works as well. And I think you've got to know who you are and at what point you can't get there. Just don't wait till the last week or the last 20 days and say, hey, now a tutor or a course is going to do its magic in 20 days. That's not going to happen. If you weren't able to do this in 3 months, don't expect a course to work its magic in 20 days. It's still a process. It's a process of learning.
Okay, so I think probably because this is MBA Spotlight's a little bit more focused on the whole in this broader event on applications. I'm getting some questions kind of around kind of that thinking about, well, what sort of score might I need? Good question that just popped up here. What's the best way to understand that my profile is average or above average? Um, don't My answer to this would be don't isolate yourself. Go talk to people. Talk to an admissions consultant. There's tons of them out there. There's booths at MBA Spotlight. You can go talk to an admissions consultant to share your profile, get a sense of where you stand. That might be the easiest way if it's not clear to you. If you want to do kind of a deeper dive, you can always look around on LinkedIn, look at people who graduated from your target school, have profiles broadly similar to yours, and get a sense that way. I guess anything else anybody would add to that as far as getting your head around where you stand profile wise, your target score? I just want to jump in on that.
I think one thing that I've seen a lot of people do, and it's worked beautifully for them, is if you are from one of the traditional backgrounds, so consulting, so folks at Ernst and Young or McKinsey, or in fact even at tech companies where you've seen folks around you go in and get a top MBA, you kind of know what if your senior got into a top school a couple of years ago, you know what their profile was, and you can compare how you compare against them. That will give you a fairly good idea, because honestly, when I think about an individual's profile, it's not your background, just your background or just the organization that you work in. It's also about the achievements you've had at work. It's the extracurriculars, and you could go to an admissions consultant. No one's going to give you more than 30 minutes free of charge, if at all, honestly. And you'll get some insights, but if you've seen people around you go to top schools, you know a lot about them. Then that's one way. I think that's a much more effective way to benchmark yourself. And
And Stacey, I think I saw you pop up there.
Yeah, so I think I definitely agree that you have to, go talk to the schools that you're interested in and go talk to admissions consultants. There are two places where you can start to get an idea for yourself without having to rely on going to talk to somebody else. There are basically two numbers that you can look up and compare to your own numbers, which is the average GPA and the average test score for whatever test you're going to take. And so you want to apply to Harvard or you want to apply to a certain school. And you can go and you can see what their averages are for the people who've actually been admitted. And you can see, okay, just on those two numbers alone, am I in range? Am I above range? Am I below range? And that gives you an idea of, okay, well, if I'm below on both of those numbers, that doesn't mean I can't get into this school, but it does mean that I'm going to have things elsewhere in my application that offset whatever those are. If I'm above on both of those numbers, again, that doesn't mean I'm going to get into this school, but it means that in one of the other aspects of my application, I might be able to have something that's a little bit below average. Maybe I don't have as much work experience or whatever it might be. And that might still be okay if those numbers are higher than the average for that school. So that just starts to give you an idea of what schools can you consider sort of schools that might be easier versus more challenging for you to be competitive at, or what are the other things within your application that you may or may not be able to tweak, right? It's hard to change your work history suddenly, that sort of thing. But what are the other places in your application that might offer you an opportunity either to offset the lower numbers, or it's okay that those things are a little bit weaker because your numbers are higher?
Let's stick with this admission, kind of this theme of kind of the intersection of test scores and admissions, because we're getting some good questions around that from the live group here. Would you say that admissions teams are looking at the quant scores, and what would you say is an average quant score for a top 10 school? And again, as we record this, we're roughly a year into the GMAT Focus Edition era. So the scales just changed late 2023, early 2024. We're recording this in late 2024. So this is really the first admission cycle dealing with this new score scale. A lot of you are never going to have any idea what that old score scale was. It doesn't really matter. The new score scale, we don't have clean data on it because very, very few people, as we record this, have been admitted with new GMAT score data. My suspicion has always been, and again, no data. So this is just conjecture based on behavior we've seen from human beings over many, many years. People respond around numbers, right? So what we saw when the GRE first became a big thing in MBA admissions 10, 15 years ago was, okay, well, 170 is a perfect score on a GRE section, 150 is average, so 160 must be a key round dividing line. So we saw a lot of behavior where people would have much better outcomes once they crossed that 160 threshold on both sections. Historically, 700 for generations, literally generations before any of us were born, and I'm not that young. 700 was a key threshold on the GMAT, on the SAT. My hunch is that 80 is going to be a key threshold for top programs on all three sections. Is that to say that schools are going to throw your application away if you get a 79 on quant? No. 80 is a really freaking good quant score. Like, you've got to be really good to get an 80 on quant. So there's going to be plenty of applicants in the pool with high 70 scores at elite schools who are getting in. I just think if we need a benchmark at this point where we don't have clean data, I feel I'm going to sleep better at night if all of my students are walking into the admission season with 80s on all three sections, in addition to whatever composite score they need. So again, conjecture at this stage, we don't have data, but like I said, if you want to jump in on that, any thoughts? Since I might
Yeah,
look really
yeah.
dumb for saying that in a year.
No, I
but-
think what you're saying is pretty accurate, but I do think too it's not necessarily an exact science where it's tough because you say if you get GMAT score X, can it get you into a program? And sometimes it doesn't. But then if you get a lower GMAT score Y, it can keep you from a program. So it's as they say, it's one thing amongst many. But you always want to be in a situation where, at a bare minimum, your GMAT score can kind of check the box of what you need to happen. So then they can openly, without reservation, look at the rest of your application. And so a lot of times that's what the GMAT functions as. And yeah, I think as years go by with the current version of the GMAT having more and more data and more historical data, we could maybe put our fingers on exactly what you should get going into these top schools. But yes, to a degree, it's a bit of a guessing game at this point. Where we have ideas and hypotheses, but we don't know with 100% certainty.
And schools are instructed, by the way. So GMAT gives schools the guidance, use percentiles, and there's
Yeah,
conversion
right.
tables. So that guidance is out there. But when you think about the mountain of stuff that the people reading your applications, I mean, they have so much information on you, so much information to analyze, so many applicants. I just think people tend to react a little bit. They kind of start benchmarking in their heads. And that's part of why I kind of throw that number of 80 out there. Rajat, go for it.
Yes, I think so. If you go back to the classical version, B schools had this benchmark of 47. They say, especially top ones, where Booth had this thing over there. And when you look at 80, that kind of maps to that 47. It's from a percentile level. So I think that 80 is a very good guess. Actually, this is the bare minimum in quant that you're looking at. And quant actually starts to become more and more interesting now as a benchmark, because as schools, I don't know how if folks here have seen what are the top skills that employers are looking at, and in those top skills, analytics and AI have been number 2 and number 3. Last year, those skills were around that 17, 18 mark. And when you look at the kind of skills that you're looking at, number 1 is strategic thinking, by the way. So essentially, quant, a bare minimum knowledge of quant to be able to do well in AI application as well as analytics starts to become more interesting over there. Wharton's has had this big push around AI and an application of it. So that 80, I think, is if you're looking at top 10, not beyond top 10, things may change, but top 10, I think I'd say 80 is a safe bet. You want to get 80 in quant. Of course, that median GMAT score is a completely different thing, but 80 is what I would recommend. Yes.
Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left. And apologies, we're not going to have any chance to get to everyone's questions. Feel free to keep lobbing them in there just in case we have room for 1 or 2 more. How do you think about when to bail on the GMAT entirely? So for somebody who's just starting out and they get going on the GMAT, and let's suppose that data insights is making their brain bleed and it's a nightmare. How do you think about that decision to switch over to the GRE or the EA or to look for schools that have waivers? Is there a particular threshold or a particular rule of thumb where you might say to a student you're working with, might be time to think about something else? Stacey, go for it.
So you hit on this a little bit when you said, let's say the DI sections is driving them crazy. The issue is really, so what is it that's driving you crazy about this test? And this is to switch from any test to any test, right? What is it about this test that's driving you crazy? And is that going to change if you change tests? And so I'll give you an example of one thing that I see a lot where I'm like, oh, that's going to go with you if you change tests. And this is true for any test. If I am working with somebody who is having issues with time management and is just not letting go on questions, and spending 5 minutes on multiple questions in a row and then running out of time at the end of the section. Well, that's going to be an issue on any test. you have to conquer that time management issue, even if you switch tests. It's true that the time management, the time pressure is a little bit less intense on the GRE and the EA because they're section adaptive instead of question adaptive, but time management is still a huge issue. If critical reasoning is driving you crazy, or reading comp, those are pretty similar on both tests. So it depends on whether whatever it is that's holding you back is something that will be different for the test that you're considering switching to or not. That's the real question.
Jeff,
I would say come to us if you can't figure it out, and if we say you can't do it, you probably should. But yes, what Stacey said is absolutely right. It's the same challenges, regardless of the test that you go for. It's a competitive test. If there are percentiles in there, you've got to get to a certain percentile. GRE Quant, I believe, is slightly easier than GMAT Quant, ever so slightly.
I agree, but then that means it's easier for everybody.
Yes,
so
it's easier for everybody.
switching?
Right.
Yeah, so
I
if
mean,
phenomenal in verbal, and you come to us, you just can't hit quant. Maybe that's a scenario. I mean, that's again one of those very extreme cases over there. But honestly, for most people, I mean, this is a test. You're gonna spend what, 250 grand on an MBA. You want to be able to take multi-million-dollar decisions. I mean, an average MBA student 2 years post graduation talks about investing. I mean, focuses on making $10 million decisions. This is a challenging test, honestly speaking. So, yeah.
I agree, Stacey. I think you're spot on that whatever your issues are on the GMAT are going to come with you to the EA is almost the same test. It's just reconfigured. I mean, the questions are nearly the same. If you are getting your head bashed in by reading or by graphs or whatever it might be, or the quant, it's going to happen on the EA too. But here's what often I think changes the decision for people. It's that I think these scores are treated somewhat differently in admissions. And again, unfortunately, especially if you're watching this video later, you're watching this in a year or two, there's going to be more data. A lot of the things I'm going to say right now may not hold up once we have data on new GMAT scores and MBA admissions. But what we've historically seen is, yeah, schools kind of say you've checked the box if you hit a 160 on both sections of the GRE. Is checking the box enough to power you in? Different question. But let's suppose that you're a candidate who's super strong, great, they're going to love you. You just need to show that the test, all you need to do on the test is show that you are good enough at this stuff to be okay in grad school. Do you need to crush the GMAT and get a 750? No, you don't. You need enough to check the box. If it's easier for you to check that box on the GRE by getting a couple of 160s, that might just be an easier thing for you. So the argument I would make is, depending on your situation, I think it tends to be much more about the score you need for your target program, given your profile. And for the unfortunate folks, and this is going to sound cynical, but it's the reality, that if you're from certain demographics, you are the type of candidate that schools admit to help pump up their GMAT averages, to help them look good in the rankings. That's just our reality.
Yep.
If there's a lot of candidates who look just like you, all else being equal, you're going to need a higher GMAT score. You got to go crush the GMAT, and the GRE is maybe not your best option, even if you feel like that's the better test for you. So, long-winded way of saying, often I feel like that decision is driven much more by kind of admissions thinking than it is by the test themselves. Because we'll say to people who are really struggling on the GMAT for one reason or another, we'll say, you know what, I think you're going to be better served by the GRE. And they'll say, but there's vocabulary questions on there, and I don't know any vocabulary. I'm terrible at it. And I don't want to go memorize a 4,000 word list. And tons of things we can say to that. I don't think memorization is the best way to improve. That's another story. But we'll say, yeah, but I think you can get to a score pretty quickly that's going to check the box, and your target schools are going to take you seriously with it. And we can keep tormenting you with multi-source reasoning over here, and you're going to be here for a long time. Or I think you're good enough over here that you can check the box and move on. So again, very context dependent for the individual.
Is there anybody
Yeah.
who likes multi-source reasoning, by the way? I haven't met the person yet.
It's intimidating. It's intimidating. I don't think I've met a student who says they like it. I've met tutors who do, but
It reminds me of these case studies. So without that time pressure, it's phenomenal as a question type, and it's very relevant to students who want to go to these schools. I would say, I mean, it's a wonderful question type. I just wish the timing piece worked out slightly better. Yes, very relevant.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair, Rajat. I think data insights in general, I think it's wonderful in terms of the feeling of, hey, here's a data display that's flawed. Yeah, this is what you're going to be dealing with in business school and the rest of your career. It's fantastic. Some students struggle to improve on it, and it can get intimidating. But
Right.
okay, one last question before we wrap up. I think it's a really, really good one. So, regardless of whether, I think it's a good question, regardless of whether you're just starting or whether you're somebody who's looking around too and you're going to take the test in a few weeks here. So, what do you suggest one do to enhance the exam day performance, match potential, avoid last minute mistakes, and replicate practice performance onto a test? So, how do you execute just as well on test day as you do on your practice test? We got 3 minutes. We'll go around for everybody real quick. And what's your one tip for making sure you perform your best on test day?
I have a good one. I think it's about your mentality going into the test. If you can treat your GMAT or your exam just as you would any other test, any other practice test, then you'll be able to perform the same way you were on that test. If you put it on a pedestal, you think of your future while taking it, you allow nerves to affect you, then yeah, you're not going to perform to the best of your ability. So you really got to hone in and have the right mentality when walking into that test.
Stacey?
I love that, John. I fully agree. So I'm going to say in the last 7 days, certainly, and ideally in the last 14 days, the last 2 weeks, don't try to learn anything new. Don't try to lift your score. What you're looking to do at the end, at the very end, as you're gearing up to take the test, this is like, okay, the gold medal Olympics match is coming up. You just want to execute at your current level, like have a great test day, right? And so for that last 7 to 14 days, you're doing some practice, you're taking your last practice test maybe a week before, whatever, but you're just trying to do exactly what you want to do on test day. When you're reviewing work, you're not trying to learn and get better or do stuff that you didn't know how to do the day before. You're just, oh, I made a careless mistake there. How am I not going to make that careless mistake on test day? Oh, I mismanaged my time here. What's the better decision that I wouldn't want to make if I hit the same situation on test day? So for all of us, our score is not a single score. It's not like a single point and you always get the same score. We have a range. You can have a bad day and you can have a good day. Set yourself up to have a good day on test day in that last week or so.
Raja?
Yeah, so I think what Jeff and Stacey said, both of those things are really, really good. I just kind of summarize this. Make a routine, and you should have a checklist, which is what I've been doing for my mocks. Do a bit of warm up. I do recommend people to do a bit of warm up before the test, 4 to 5 questions so that you get your brain going. The other thing is take the uncertainty out. So if you're taking a test at the test center, make sure that you visit the test center at least a few days in advance if if you have that luxury, so that uncertainty is taken away. Also, maybe get slightly bad headphones because you're not going to get, if you have high quality headphones, you're not going to get those at the test center. So just get used to that aspect of it because that's an uncertainty that you're going to face. But yeah, make a routine, warm up, take the uncertainties away. That's all.
I love all of it. 2 quick things. Number 1, sleep. A lot of you guys work too hard. Seriously, get some sleep. 8 hours a night. Your brain does not perform at its best until you're sleeping consistently for a good chunk of time before test day. Last thing, words from a friend of mine who's a sports psychologist, works with some of our students on kind of the sort of those mental skills aspects of taking the tests. If you feel nervous walking to the test, that's your body telling you that you care. It's not a bad thing. So if you walk in and you start feeling jittery, totally normal. It's your body telling you you care. Remind yourself of that before you launch in and start answering questions. All right, we are out of time here. Rajat, Stacey, Jeff, thank you so much for doing this with us, and thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you for hosting, Charles. Bye-bye.